Einat Wilf, former member of Knesset, and she has a bachelor's degree in government and fine arts from Harvard University. So perhaps this is a little bit of coming home for you. An MBA also from INSEAD and a PhD from in political science from Cambridge University. Dr. Wilf is the former chair of the Knesset Education, Sports, and Culture Committee and served as a member of the influential Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Currently, she is a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Dr. Wilf was, as a member of the Labor Party, the member of Knesset who really felt that this issue was very important. And we're glad to have her here with us today.
Thank you for this very kind introduction. I truly want to acknowledge and thank Robert McGee, Daniel Pipes, and Steve Rosen for their tenacity, persistence in pursuing this issue. I think we all here around the room can feel a bit like an advanced commando unit, that we're taking an issue that I think one day many people will wonder how come it wasn't front and center on the agenda. And you certainly, Congresswoman Bachmann, I think can feel yourself as one of the leaders in this effort, and I thank you for that and for being with us here today. It's a bit like maybe people talked about the Iranian issue 15 years ago. People thought it was small, marginal, unimportant, and then it made it to the top of the agenda. And hopefully it will take us fewer years, but certainly we're on the path. So why are we discussing this issue now? Because supposedly for about 20 years, starting from the Oslo negotiations and agreements, the thinking was the refugee issue is a final status issue. It will be determined in negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, and therefore we don't need to get into the details of this issue. It will be negotiated. I think one of the reasons that we're sitting here today and beginning to discuss this issue is that there's a growing understanding, you might like it, you might not, that peace in the way that we thought about it in the 90s, in the sense of handshakes on manicured lawns, rainbows and doves in the backgrounds, a sense of like peace in our time, that era is over. And we're not going to see that kind of final status agreement that resolves all issues anytime soon, and that it's not around the corner. As a result, I think there's growing recognition that as people who all in all do care about the cause of peace, we have to ask a very simple question. Are the policies that we're upholding making it harder or easier for future leaders, future generations, depending how long you think it would take, to make peace? And this issue is coming up right now because the answer is clearly that by continuing the West's current policy, it is making it harder for future leaders and generations to reach an agreement, and that certainly does not make a lot of sense. And this is how I came to work on this issue. I pride myself as a person who tries to look at hard facts and reality, even if it might not be pleasant, and to look at whether policies are based in a true understanding of reality. And this is how I came to the idea of let's try to look at the issue, and even if we don't have peace tomorrow, let's try to at least make it easier in the future. Now, I think we've heard quite a bit today on why the current policy makes it harder. I have a colleague in the Knesset who's fond of saying that after World War II, two refugee agencies was established. One was a tremendous success, one a huge failure. The failed agency is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. They started with over 100 million refugees, and today they're left with very few. And UNRWA started with several hundreds of thousands, and then now they're upward of 5 million. So bureaucratic success if you ever had one. And that really shows the sense of why we're making it harder. Now, when people look at this question of are we making a future agreement harder and easier, they will immediately tell you, let's focus on settlements. And that's what you hear around the world, and this is generally how, especially the Western world behaves, but everyone in general. The thinking is, if we stop the expansion of settlements, this is contributing to the possibility of a two-state solution. There is very, very little attention on the expansion of the refugee status, the inflation in the refugee number. Now, when I go to European and Western governments, I tell them, look, if your policy, the official policy of your state, your country, is to support a two-state solution, and this is why you're so angry about settlements. And this is why every time that a building plan is being approved, there's a public outcry. I get that. If your policy, though, on the settlements were the same as your policy on the refugee status of Palestinians, it would look as follows. Israel, go and build as many settlements as you want. We don't want to prejudice final status issues. It's a disputed issue, so go ahead and build. We have nothing to say on the matter. Build in perpetuity. In fact, we'll be happy to contribute upward of $1 billion a year towards this cause. Never tell the settlers that they will have to leave their homes. Don't tell them that. But we trust you that when the day comes to negotiate a two-state solution, you will do so in good faith and in a way that assures a proper Palestinian state. I can assure you that all Western government officials that I meet with think this is crazy. So I tell them, well, you think this is crazy, but this is what you're doing with the other major big issue. You're essentially telling the Palestinians the following. Go ahead and create new refugees from a war long over. Keep expanding the number in perpetuity. We'll be happy to contribute upward of $1 billion towards this cause. Don't ever tell them that they're not going to places that they were never in, actually. But don't ever tell them that. And we trust you that when the day comes to negotiate a peace agreement based on a two-state solution with Israel, you will do so in good faith and in a way that upholds the idea of a Jewish homeland. So the message I bring to Western governments is, if you thought the earlier policy was insane, then please do explain to me how this policy is not equally insane. And this is your policy. I'm not saying if we're in favor or not in favor. Your policy is a two-state solution, and you are literally doing your best to undermine it. And this is really the key message, and it's been wonderful to hear all the speakers here in terms of the focus on the key issue. Steve, what you said was excellent about being focused, because UNRWA can be squeaky clean. They can get the accounting medal of honor. They can not engage in incitement. But as long as they continue to create a new generation of refugees all the time, we are now talking about the fifth generation that is getting this status as we speak. As long as they continue to do that, nothing else matters, because that's what perpetuates the conflict. Now, when I started exploring this issue and trying to understand how come that so much of public and global attention is focused on settlements and nothing, literally nothing, is being done on this issue, I started to talk to various people who are, of course, engaged in various activities abroad, whether pro-Israel or pro-peace and all of that, and they told me, look to your own. The problem is in Israel. Whenever anyone wants to highlight the problematics of UNRWA, it's Israel that says, leave them alone. So I started to look what the issue is in Israel, and of course the core was the defense establishment. Now, the problem with the defense establishment, I went to meet them on several occasions, and what they said was pretty much the following. Everything you say about UNRWA, absolutely true. We'll say worse. But at least they're not Hamas. So the thinking of the defense establishment was, for example, in Gaza, if UNRWA will not run a school, Hamas will run that school. So better UNRWA than Hamas. Now, the defense establishment, and it is understandable, is not very good in handling ideas. Ideas, ideology, and the impact of ideology. They deal with tanks and with airplanes, and as far as they're concerned, UNRWA is not a terrorist organization, Hamas is a terrorist organization, end of story. The defense establishment is not able to think in terms that say, long term, there's no difference. Because UNRWA, by creating generation after generation of people who believe that the country on the other side of the border is their own, are essentially feeding Hamas. They're creating the consciousness that ultimately feeds into these organizations. But the defense establishment is not able to think in those terms, and I understand that. So as far as they're concerned, they're asking who's feeding them now, who's schooling them now, who's giving them social welfare. That now, as long as it's not Iranian money, that's all we care about. And our role, and my role in negotiating with the defense establishment, was to try to separate this issue and to get them at least not to interfere. And I was finally, after much negotiations, able to finally get in writing from them a kind of non-interference promise. As long as we don't touch money, we don't touch the provision of the services, they understand that there is value in conducting a campaign to highlight how dangerous the idea of UNRWA is, and the idea of perpetuating this conflict through this monarchy of heirs of the refugee status. Now, when I met with Steve, after I got the defense establishment, Steve highlighted another issue, saying, the other issue we can't touch is anything that goes to the General Assembly. As very well explained, the General Assembly can pass any resolution it wants against Israel. If they say that the earth is flat because of Israel, they can pass that resolution. So anything that has to do with UN General Assembly resolutions that relate to UNRWA, we can't touch. So we had to locate a sliver where we're operating today, but I think it's still a very revolutionary sliver. It's not about money, it's not about provision of services, it's not about folding UNRWA into the UNHCR. All of these things are not going to fly. But it is about finally talking about the real numbers and the real definition. Because what we found out is that the mandate of UNRWA says that it should care for the refugees, and they're defined in one way, and their descendants. So the descendants are not called refugees, they're called descendants. UNRWA, should they be in need, should care for them. But there's absolutely no need to call them refugees in order to care for them. You can very well call them descendants. Now imagine what would happen if the world started to talk about 40,000 refugees. What would happen to the consciousness of talking about a two-state solution? I can assure you that even the most right-wing government in Israel, if these were the numbers that the West acknowledged, they will say tomorrow morning, as part of the final status agreement, all the refugees are more than welcome to become citizens of Israel and according to the UN resolutions, as long as they live in peace with their neighbors. You think what it does to the consciousness if you're talking about tens of thousands rather than 5 billion. If you're talking about 5 million, you clearly don't accept the idea that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination and to a state of their own. So we need to talk about the right numbers, and we need to also talk about the right image. When people talk about refugees, what is the image that comes to your mind? You think of people who have just escaped from war, huddled in leaky tents just across the border, deprived of everything. You do not think of middle-class families in Ramallah. And yet, as one European representative to UNRWA said once, he said, "Don't tell anyone, I know these middle-class families in Ramallah very well." So there's this image that also makes touching the issue difficult. Because whenever I talk about this issue, even though I talk about it from a liberal perspective, from preserving the possibility of a two-state solution, the possibility of peace, I somehow come across as the mean woman who wants to take food from the mouth of refugee children. Because that's the image people have when we use the word refugee. So we also need to begin to expose who the people are. The people are, by and large, people who preserve this status as a sense of pride, but it has nothing to do with their need and nothing to do with their living conditions. Most people that UNRWA registers as refugees are not even living in refugee camps. And by the way, if UNRWA were not committed to perpetuating the issue, none of them would be living in refugee camps. There's no problem in Gaza that they can live anywhere they want. And also, in certain areas in the West Bank, there's no need to keep these camps alive. And by the way, these camps also are no longer these huddled tents. They've become permanent living establishments that are there to preserve the status. So what I would like to see ultimately this campaign lead to is that the issue of refugees and the inflation in their number and the misuse of this image would get as much public and global attention as the issue of settlements. That every time that the world goes ballistic over a building plan in East Jerusalem, every time a child born in Gaza getting refugee status, well, also the world will go ballistic over the fact that that happens as well. So I know this is a bit of a long shot, but it means that finally the world will start dealing with the conflict in its essential element and not just the things that are easy to deal with. Now I do want to say, I'm asking nothing of the Palestinians. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, they can continue to dream of Israel disappearing. They can continue to dream of rolling back the historical clock. I am asking them nothing. What I am asking is of the West, that the West stop colluding in these dreams. One meeting that I had with European government officials, they don't like when I bring those arguments, but they have to admit that they're powerful. But they really don't want to deal with this issue. One thing they say, well, the Palestinians know that they're not going to go back to Israel. They were never there, but go back. And I say, well, don't you want to start telling them that? So that's also something that we need to be very clear. The Palestinians can dream whatever they want, but it is the West that has the responsibility not to fund this dream, not to collude in it, not to support it, and that's what they're doing today. So when we bring this issue, I think there's a lot of work to do first to educate our own, to bring it to the attention of many others, but I do think that one of the great benefits we have here is that we can truly create bipartisan support for this. Because it's not about being mean to refugees or being evil to the Palestinians. It's about preserving the possibility of peace. It is about preserving the possibility of a two-state solution. And I believe that this is something that both people on the left and on the right can get behind. And I do want to thank all of you and commend you for being the advanced commander unit, from bringing this critical, essential issue to a more public agenda. Thank you.
Well, that was quite a treat, and I want to thank both of you for being here. Do we have any questions? For Dr. Provera, for Einat Wilf? Well, maybe I'll start. You mentioned, Dr. Provera, that those who are prepared to look at UNRWA critically are a minority. How small a minority in the EU apparatus? Is there any openness to these kinds of questions in Lady Ashton's, what her staff is called the European External Action Corps? Is there any openness in the Commission? Is there any openness in the Council, the Parliament?
As I told I wouldn't say the friend of Israel, but anyway, people trying to look at the issue with attention, paying attention to the accountability of UNRWA as a refugee protecting organization. We are not many. Friends of Israel are not many in European Parliament, I have to admit, but it's easy to check. What can we do? We have to let the voice of Israel come to European Parliament with an initiative like this one, and hope that other parliamentarians come and listen in order to make up their decision in an honest way. We don't need propaganda. We need honest information and about UNRWA, transparent operational system and efficiency on implementing the operational system of UNRWA. We have to work on two different levels. One is the political level, international level, in Europe, in the international organization, and European Parliament, for instance, but only European Commission, not only the Parliament. And the second level is the ordinary people level. It's quite important that European citizens know better what is the situation on the ground in Israel, what is the situation in Judea and Samaria, because there is no information at all and a lot of prejudice. This has to be cancelled in order to open the door to a new idea and a future cooperation. Because without information, it's impossible to take free decisions. And so we need initiative like this one transferred to European Parliament and other cultural circles, and hope that a new era will be opened.
Let me ask you one opening question, Einat. Daniel and I met with former Foreign Minister Yvette Lieberman, and he was very supportive of an effort to deal with this issue. And the Deputy Foreign Minister, Danny Ayalon, made a whole video about UNRWA. It looks like the next Foreign Minister will be Yair Lapid, from all appearances. Have you had the opportunity to discuss this with him? Do you have any sense, whether you discussed it or not, of the likelihood that he will take this on as an issue?
Not yet. First of all, we're actually waiting to see who the foreign minister will be. We'll know that in a few days. It will either be the prime minister holding it for Lieberman, or it will be Lapid. Once I know who the foreign minister is, if it is Lapid, I will certainly make sure to bring it to his attention. And just as a small aside comment, I want to tell you I had several meetings in the European Parliament. There are many friends of Israel in the European Parliament. It always looks like this. You have members of the European Parliament standing up whenever an issue around Israel is discussed, and they say, as a good friend of Israel, and then they go and say the worst things. And you're saying, okay, these are not the friends we need.
Well, Daniel warns me that we have very little time. Do we have time for... Okay, do we have a question from the floor, please?
Yes. Vice Chairman Provera, I was wondering, first of all, thank you very much for your comments. Very interesting. I was wondering, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we're also recording this, so I may have to repeat your question.
Okay, that's fine. Vice Chairman, thank you for your comments. Very much appreciated. I was just wondering if, for my own information, you could elaborate upon the idea of the assimilation of the refugees. Into which countries do you see them being assimilated? How viable or feasible is that, and how realistic a suggestion is that? So I'd be grateful
If I could just repeat the question for our recording machine. The question was, how realistic is assimilation of the Palestinian refugees, and if so, into which countries do you anticipate them being assimilated?
And if I may follow on with one question for Dr. Wilf. Dr. Wilf, just with regard to the importance of semantics in this issue, and I thank you for raising this point with regard to the term refugees and pondering that is incurred. Do we in Israel, just for my own interest, not equally have a duty, being sensitive to this semantic issue, to cease to apply the term settlement to areas which are in fact communities, so that the world might understand what...
If I could, in the interest of time, that's way outside our topic today, so I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut off the issue, but perhaps, Einat, you could concentrate on the first question.
Sure. Yeah.
Ladies first.
Just quickly on the assimilation issue, as mentioned here by the numbers, there's really no need for assimilation. First of all, again, the war is long over. It's typically something that you need to do when someone has recently been deprived of their home and livelihood. The vast majority are settled, either as Jordanian citizens or as call them proto-citizens of the embryonic Palestinian state, which is now recognized by European governments, so they should follow up on that policy and say, okay, if they live in Gaza, if they live in the West Bank, they should certainly be considered as living in their place. And the same for Lebanon and Syria. I will say also something interesting about Syria. Israel was willing to let Palestinians who are living in Syria and have the status of refugees into Gaza. But with the understanding that once they're in Gaza, they are in their own place and they no longer can have the status of claiming to return to Israel. They refused that. So we need to understand this is so political and so ideological that they prefer to continue suffering when they're facing humanitarian disaster, but to give up this notion that Israel belongs to them.
I think that it should be easy to ask all these refugees, hundreds of thousands, where they are actually, because we have to remember that it is the fourth or the fifth generation of refugees we have to deal with. And as they are resident in different countries of the area, Lebanon, Syria and so on, I think that it should be quite natural for them to be assimilated. But there is a political goal that we have not to forget. They are a tool for political reasons. It's very important for Arab policies to keep them in the camp around Israel and say them, look, your homeland is there and you have to go back there because that will be the future, the happiness and so on. But what could we do if we really want to have them assimilated? To explain that the future is where you have work, you have social conditions, you have the possibility to be free where there is rule of law. And this is the main point, the main problem that they have to face, I mean the Palestinian refugees. Because in all the country around Israel, there is no democracy, no rule of law, no work, a difficult future, and that is the problem, to my mind. And we are paying people in UNRWA school who teach to young Palestinians, you have to go back, your homeland is over there. It's not the right way to teach. They are teaching hatred to Israel. They are not teaching the love for a social life, for an ordinary life. They are political tools in the hand of skilled politicians, I would say. And they use cynically all these people, frustrating their hope and their needs and their future in order to join the political target to destroy Israel.
Well, we've had two superb presentations, and I hate to cut it off, but I know we are all very eager to hear from Michelle Bachman and from Jonathan Shanza for our final session. I'm sorry, we really got to move to our final session because of time limitations. You can speak perhaps to Dr. Wilf and Dr. Provera privately.